File number 4. The house that waited for its owner. They said the house had been empty for 47 years. That was the official number in the municipal records, printed neatly under occupancy history next to the note property condemned pending demolition. But the local papers hadn't written about it. Nobody ever really does when a building simply waits. It takes more effort to care about something that's patient. I first saw it on a fog-wrapped morning where the trees stood like witnesses and the road was too narrow for a city this old. The house looked tired, but not broken. Its shutters hung straight, its windows were sealed, and the iron gate rusted but locked carried a brass plate that had no name. Only a single line of text, entry restricted by Municipal Order 31A, but even from the street, I could tell someone still tended to it. The grass was short, the path swept clear. The padlock on the gate was polished, newer than the fence. You don't buy a new lock for something forgotten. I was sent to document the place, part of a larger initiative to update the city's historical archive. Most of the work was bureaucratic, photographing fads, checking ownership files, noting if demolition permits matched reality. I didn't expect mystery. I expected dust, but the file on this property, file 004, Hawthorne Estate, came with something else. A note clipped to the front, handwritten in blue ink, "Do not enter alone." No official record beyond 1978. When a government file warns you with handwriting, not print, you pay attention. The house stood on the edge of the old district, where the river used to cut through before the rerouting project. The area was a forgotten peninsula, half residential, half wild, where maps disagreed on where the streets ended. You could tell the city didn't know what to do with it. The newer buildings had numbers. The older ones had names. The Hawthorne Estate was the last of its kind. From the outside, it didn't look haunted. It looked rehearsed, as though it had been practicing the role of empty house for decades and had become perfect at it. The windows stared forward, blank, unchallenging. Yet every few seconds, as the fog moved, I thought I saw movement behind the upper curtains. A shift in tone, a darker shadow. Not human, not animal, just awareness. I took my first note standing at the gate, structure intact, no visible decay beyond surface oxidation. Perimeter clear, but path unusually clean. No signage of trespassing. Unusual silence, birds audible in distance but not immediate vicinity. It wasn't just quiet, it was selective. The kind of silence that feels aimed. I set up my recorder, the one we used for site documentation. Nothing fancy, just a handheld device meant to capture environmental audio. When I played it back later, I noticed something. The tape hissed as expected, but beneath it, in the background, there was a faint tapping. 4 beats, pause. 4 beats again. Like a rhythm waiting for recognition. It wasn't mechanical. It was patient. I got permission to enter the property 2 weeks later. The paperwork took longer than it should have. The registry couldn't locate the original owner. And the inheritance record stopped in 1978, when a man named Arthur Hawthorne was last documented as paying taxes. He'd been declared missing in 1983, then presumed deceased. The file didn't say how or why. It just moved him from resident to estate. When I arrived that second morning, the fog had cleared, replaced by the kind of sterile daylight that makes old things look honest. The key the department gave me worked on the gate, but the front door opened before I used it. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and faint perfume, the kind that lingers long after anyone's worn it. Dust floated like memory in sunlight that shouldn't have reached this deep. The furniture was old, but not decayed. Every surface clean, every drawer closed, every clock still wound, and then there was the piano. It stood in the main hall, under a cracked skylight. A single note was pressed down the D above middle C. The hammer didn't strike. It was just held there, as if a hand had never left. I released the key. It stayed down. I found the old logbook in the study, an ornate ledger, kept meticulously until 1978. The last entry, dated March 14th, read, "Storm expected. Guests delayed. House prepared for their arrival." There was no entry after that. The following pages were blank, but the paper looked used, as if something had been written and erased carefully, without tearing fibers. Whoever had done it knew how to remove ink without leaving scars. I sat in the study and began reading backward, hoping for a pattern. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, belonging to someone who believed order could contain meaning. Each day was catalogued, weather mild, servants dismissed early, guest room 3 unoccupied, but something changed in tone around February. The entries became fragmented. "House restless tonight," one said. "Heard door close, but all were open." Another, the mirrors clouded again even after polishing. Then, on March 12th, the house keeps time even when the clock stopped. I closed the book. For a long moment, I listened, and then I heard it again. 4 soft taps from somewhere above, evenly spaced. The same rhythm from the recording. I called out, "Is someone there?" No answer. But the air in the hall shifted, not colder, not darker, just aware. That night, I stayed in the local inn, trying to process what I'd seen. I told myself it was acoustics. Old houses breathe, settle, echo. But at 3:47 am, I woke to the sound of the same tapping for beats, pause, 4 beats coming from the radio on the nightstand. The radio wasn't plugged in. I recorded it. When I played it back the next day, the sound had changed. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was Morse code. I'm not fluent, but I know enough to recognize structure. I translated the first sequence. It spelled WAIT, wait. The next time I entered the house, I brought back up a technician named Saul who handled environmental surveys. He wasn't superstitious, but he believed in patterns. We set up motion sensors, EMF detectors, recorders, cameras. It felt theatrical, but necessary. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. Then one of the cameras facing the piano glitched, the image froze, distorted by static. When it resumed, the piano key that had been pressed before was now released. Another one was down. The same D. Saul checked the feed. Could be power fluctuation, he said, but we weren't using power. The house wasn't connected to the grid. At 2:18 p.m., the hallway lights flickered once faint, but synchronized. We didn't have lights running. The bulbs glowed from their filaments alone, as if memory could still power glass. Saul turned toward me, uneasy. "You feel that?" I nodded. The air wasn't heavy. It was full. We left at sunset. When we reviewed the recordings later, every audio file contained the same rhythm, increasing in volume. 4 beats, pause. 4 beats, pause, except the final one. In the last file, Saul's voice was faintly audible. He whispered, "Someone's standing behind you." Then static. He didn't come back after that. Said the place didn't want company. I didn't argue. I returned alone. The door opened before I touched it. Inside, everything was as before, untouched, undisturbed. But on the piano, the keys formed a pattern. Now, 4 white, 4 black, alternating. The logbook in the study lay open to the last page again. A new line had appeared, written in faint ink. Guest returned. House awake. I touched the page. The ink was still drying. From somewhere deep within the walls came a soft sound, like wood expanding, sighing after a long sleep. The air felt like breath, the kind that waits for permission to speak, and then, from the empty hall, the faint voice of a man. "I've been expecting you." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A man's voice, calm, aged, but not frail, the kind that carried authority without needing to raise volume. It sounded like someone who had been rehearsing the same sentence for decades and had finally remembered why. "I've been expecting you," it said again, softer this time, as if testing whether I would answer. I froze. The recorder in my pocket was running, though I hadn't touched it. The small red light blinked steadily, reflecting off the glass of a framed painting beside the piano. The house was listening. I swallowed the instinct to respond immediately. "Who are you?" I asked, finally. No reply. Only that rhythm again. 4 faint taps, like fingers drumming on hollow wood somewhere behind the walls. I turned toward the staircase. The sound came from the 2nd floor. Each step groaned in sequence, but not from my weight. They were moving in sync with the taps, as if the house itself was remembering how to walk. Halfway up, I noticed the portraits. They lined the walls, oval frames, sepia photographs, but none of them had faces. Every image was blurred precisely where the face should be. Hands, clothes, posture, all clear. But the heads were nothing but soft fog, smudged clean as if history had redacted identity. The top of the stairs. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with closed doors. A smell lingered. Paper and lavender, the kind that belongs to someone meticulous. The door at the far end was slightly open. I called out again, "Arthur Hawthorne?" The door opened wider. Inside was a study smaller than the one downstairs, but warmer somehow, though there was no visible source of heat. Bookshelves reached the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes whose titles had faded to whispers. A writing desk stood near the window. The curtains were drawn, but light filtered through faintly, as if reluctant to leave. On the desk sat a phonograph, an old, brass-lidded model from the early 20th century. The record on it was cracked, yet it turned, spinning in slow motion. The needle hovered just above the groove, not touching it, but producing sound nonetheless. It was a voice. The same voice. The house remembers. Always remembers. I moved closer. The words looped, faint and distorted. Then, suddenly, a second voice joined, higher, softer, like a woman speaking from another room. Don't wake him. The phonograph stopped. The room stilled. I stood there, notebook half open, and realized something impossible. The dust on the table was undisturbed except for the shape of two hands pressed into it. As though someone had been leaning forward moments before I entered, the air trembled once, then settled. When I turned toward the doorway, a small object lay on the floor. A house key, ornate, bronze, the kind that belonged to an era when locks were built like jewelry. A tag hung from it, etched with faint letters, Master Room. I pocketed it before I could think better of it. That night, back at the inn, I replayed the recording. The voice was faint but clear. I've been expecting you. Then silence. Then the phonograph phrase. Then static. But in the last 3 seconds, something new, a whisper, almost too low to catch. You opened the wrong door. I replayed it again. The same words. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought the dream, the same hallway, but inverted. I was walking backward through it, my footsteps silent, while the taps continued ahead of me. Each door I passed closed itself softly, one after another, until I stood at the top of the staircase, facing the piano below. Someone was sitting there. I couldn't see his face, but I recognized the coat. Dark, formal, old-fashioned. The man played one note, the D, and looked toward me without moving his head. Then the sound warped, bending into a low hum that filled the house like fog. When I woke, my hands were shaking. My palms smelled faintly of cedar. I returned to the estate at dawn. The sky was washed of color, gray bleeding into white. The front door opened easily this time, as if it expected me. Inside, the silence was thicker than before, like a room holding its breath between phrases. I followed the scent, faint perfume, same as before, to the staircase. The portraits were different now. The faces were there. One of them looked like me. I stopped. My breath fogged the air. The photograph stared back, eyes sharp, expression neutral, the kind of look reserved for government IDs or obituaries. Below it, a small plaque read, Archivist 2025. I stepped closer. The brass looked freshly polished. The screws were clean. This wasn't old. Somewhere below, the piano played again. The melody wasn't random this time. 4 notes, pause. 4 again. The same rhythm as the taps, now translated into music. The tone carried through the hall like an old habit that refused to fade. I followed it downstairs. In the main room, the piano lid was open. No one sat there, but the keys moved gently, one by one. I watched for several minutes, noting every sound. Each note corresponded to a letter in Morse. When I decoded it later, it spelled, "Don't leave." The logbook lay on the piano bench, open to a blank page. Only one new line had appeared, guest confirmed. I looked up. Every clock in the house ticked in unison. The house wasn't haunted. It was alive. I stayed longer than I meant to. Hours, maybe more. Time inside the house didn't behave the same. The sunlight shifted too quickly, shadows stretched in directions that made no sense. I found myself back in the upstairs study without remembering walking there. The phonograph sat silent, but beside it now rested a small photo frame. Inside was the same blurred image from the stairway, but now the face was visible. It was mine again. This time, I wasn't alone in the photo. A woman stood beside me, wearing an old-fashioned dress, her face calm, her eyes closed as though mid-breath. The label beneath read, Arthur and Eleanor Hawthorne, 1925. The date didn't make sense. The photo was printed on glass, the kind used in early daguerreotypes. I tilted it under the light, and beneath the surface, faintly, I could see another image, the empty hallway. Reversed, the door half open. When I blinked, the woman's eyes were open. That was when I heard the second voice again, the same one from the phonograph. Don't wake him. I turned. The study door was closed. I hadn't heard it shut. I tried the handle. Locked. Then softly, a piano note echoed from downstairs. The D again. Another. And another. I realized the pattern wasn't random. It was a countdown. I pushed at the door. It didn't move. The key I'd found, the bronze one, burned in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting it to fit the lock, and it did. When it turned, the sound it made wasn't mechanical. It sighed. The door opened into darkness. A corridor I hadn't seen before stretched ahead, narrower than the rest of the house, lined with mirrors on both sides. My reflection appeared endless, each version of me slightly delayed, moving half a second slower, like bad synchronization in an old film. Halfway down, I stopped. My reflection didn't, the reflection smiled. Just slightly, then it reached out. I stumbled backward, hitting the opposite wall. The mirror cracked not from impact, but from sound. The hum returned, vibrating the glass until the fractures spread like veins. The reflection spoke with my voice. You should have left when it asked you to. The lights flickered. The mirrors clouded. My reflection faded into mist. At the end of the corridor, a faint light pulsed red, steady, like the glow of a heartbeat seen through fog. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. The air grew warm, metallic. When I reached the end, I realized where I was. The door led to the master bedroom. The key's tag had said master room. Inside, the walls were covered in writing. Dozens of phrases, scrawled in neat, repetitive lines. The house remembers. We never left. He's still sleeping. Don't open the window. And above the bed, painted in careful letters, the final line, welcome home. On the bed lay a figure covered with a sheet. I didn't want to look, but the hand beneath it moved. The sheet rose and fell with a breath that did not hurry. Not theatrical, the kind of breathing you hear from someone who knows the room belongs to them. I stood at the foot of the bed, the key still warm between my fingers, and waited for a logic that would not embarrass me later. The red pulse in the far corner was it a lamp, a hidden radio tube, a heart kept time with the slow lift of cloth. On the bedside table, a clock with no hands ticked anyway, a metronome without obligations. I said nothing. The house prefers listeners. When I finally did move, it was to straighten the blanket by a fraction, a small humane gesture to convince myself I was qualified to be here. My knuckle brushed the linen and met the weight of a wrist. Not cold, not warm, present. The sheet creased. My breath failed its rehearsal. Somewhere beyond the door, a single piano note agreed to the moment and retired. I looked for a switch, a candle, a rational exit. The room offered none. The writing on the walls had been done with discipline. No looping panic, no frantic strokes. Each sentence measured, aligned, like a clerk entering evidence in a register. The words "he's still sleeping" repeated most often, but between them, a line I had missed until the breath taught me how to read it. He sleeps until the house is ready to be awake on his behalf. The handwriting was the same as in the downstairs ledger from 1978. I touched one letter. Graphite smudged my fingertip as if the sentence had only just chosen to be dry. Arthur Hawthorne. I asked, because it was the only name the file would permit without inventing. The bed did not answer in words. Instead, the clock without hands ticked once louder, as if to underline a syllable. A draft moved along the threshold. The mirror nearest the bed clouded and cleared like a lung. The sheet settled a centimeter, the way bodies do when a thought finishes forming. I reached for the top hem. The room tightened, not in threat, but in protocol. It felt like the hush that falls in court, self-evidently no gavel needed when everyone remembers who is supposed to speak next. I did not lift the linen. The house gave me credit for that. Good, the man's voice said, not from the bed, not from the hall, but from the paint itself, thin as a pencil line and twice as sharp. You learned to leave the last veil to the house. I'm here to document, I said. The sentence sounded brittle in air like this. You are here to resume, the voice said, and the word resumed found a home behind my ribs, as if it had been waiting there since the stairway portrait decided to share my face. The red light dimmed to the color of a secret carried correctly. The mirror clouded again, and this time the fog left behind letters. Welcome home rewrote itself as welcome host. I forced my eyes off the bed. On the dresser a row of small objects waited in formation, a brass pen with a bite mark at the cap, a folded handkerchief, stiff with old perfume, a tiny key of the kind that wins clocks, and a square of cardboard with 4 holes punched in it, a player piano roll sample. Perhaps, or a tag from luggage that never arrived. The holes formed the pattern I had been hearing for days. 4, pause, 4. Rhythm as identity. Why did you disappear from the records? I asked, addressing the air, because the alternative was an impertinence. I had already promised not to perform. Records resume what they can forgive, the voice said. We chose a different kind of staying. We, I repeated, the house and I, it said. And later, the house and you. The sheet rose once, deliberate and settled. The words on the wall stilled, as if ink also knows to breathe between ideas. From the corridor, the faintest step approached, that precise old house cadence of wood acknowledging weight. It stopped before the threshold. The door did not open. Instead, the doorknob turned a quarter-inch and decided enough ceremony had been demonstrated. "Eleanor?" I asked, because the photograph downstairs had chosen that name and my brain required a policy. The woman's voice, the water whisper from the phonograph, spoke like a curtain sighing. "Don't wake him." "I won't," I said, and meant it, and the key cooled in my palm, as if thermal memory can be grateful. "Tell me," I added, "what it is you're waiting for the house to choose again," she said. The handless clock ticked a thought. Somewhere a hinge confessed a long love of oil. I stepped back to the doorway because distance is a currency that buys permission. The corridor's mirrors rested. My reflection did not lag. The red pulse in the corner softened until it felt like a companionable ember rather than an emergency. "What did you prepare for on March 14th? I said, the ledger's last date tasting like dust and citrus. "Guests," the man's voice said. "And then weather." And then a new category, which was absence that stays, the wall answered. I stood in that long, old silence that knows how to be company. The house repaid me with a draft that did not chill. In the margin of the paint, near the window, where the light had learned to filter reluctantly, another sentence faded in. "If a house is ready, someone will be owed to it." The grammar was archaic and correct. I stood in that long, old silence that knows how to be company. The house repaid me with a draft that did not chill. In the margin of the paint, near the window, where the light had learned to filter reluctantly, another sentence faded in. "If a house is ready, someone will be owed to it." The grammar was archaic and correct. I thought of all the places the pattern had followed me: the inn's unplugged radio, the streetlights blinking 4 beat during the blackout, the study door that sighed instead of clicking. This house had practiced absence so long it had become a kind of presence. The city had politely let it. Now I had stepped into the role scheduled for me. Before I knew there was a calendar. The bedsheet gathered itself by a fraction, the way careful people rise slowly so their blood remembers how. I took a step toward the hall. "Before you go," the man's voice said, "open the top drawer." I did. Inside lay an envelope sealed with wax, bearing the same thin frequency mark as the bronze key. On its face, my name in the ledger hand. I broke the seal and slid out a single card. It had 2 lines printed and 1 line left to be filled. "Custodian, term, until the house stops waiting. Witness, the housei's blank line glared gently." I put the card back and did not write on it. The house approved by letting the mirror stay clear. I left the master room with the door pulled nearly, not quite, shut, the width of a courtesy. The corridor lengthened and shortened, as corridors do when you let memory pick the perspective. I passed the portrait that had borrowed my face and found it quieter. The plaque no longer shone like new. The piano downstairs offered 4 notes as a check-in and relinquished the bench to nobody. The clocks continued to tick without hands. Smug with their mastery of principal dot in the study, a new page had opened itself on the ledger. The top line had printed without ink. "Housekeeping notes, resumption period below." The faintest script mine, not mine, had begun to write. Day 1, the house exhales. Do not mistake this for permission. Day 2, visitors must be treated like weather, predicted, tolerated, recorded, never blamed. Day 3, if a door opens before your hand arrives, you were early, not the door. I did not pick up the pen. The words continued anyway, because the house has hands wherever patience is kept. A soft knock sounded at the front. 3, not 4, and I knew at once it was the city, not the house. Bureaucracy keeps odd rhythms. I let the knock repeat twice before answering, because it is rude to show eagerness to forms. On the porch stood a municipal inspector, younger than the fence, clutching a clipboard that had survived other neighborhoods. She wore a practical coat and a look that had not been taught to believe in rhythm. "Demolition verification," she said, reading the address and then the brass plate that never had a name. "We have you scheduled for Tuesday. The file is under review," I said. She flipped a page. "That's not what my sheet says." She peered past me into the hall. Her eyes did not widen, which meant the house was being as courteous to her as it had been stern with me. "We'll need to inspect the interior." "The interior is not accepting visitors," I said. It came out not as defiance, but as policy. She considered this. Eyes traveling over wood that had rehearsed survival. "Reports say the structure is sound. Upkeep, unusual. The house keeps itself," I said. The phrase wrote itself down somewhere behind me. "That a volunteer statement?" she asked, pen poised. "A description," I said. She looked at me then with a focus that had nothing of superstition about it. "Off the record, sir, we don't like to remove places that are still doing their job." But the ledger upstairs says 47 years. Very few buildings get to wait that long. Perhaps it was waiting for me, I said, and heard how it sounded when you say the truth without proofs. She nodded once, not unkindly. We'll come back, she said, and meant the sentence as the city's version of mercy, time. When the door closed, the house relaxed a shade. A letter nuzzled itself under the threshold the way some houses move drafts. I picked it up. The wax was already broken. Inside, one line in the ledger hand, occupation confers protection. Is that legal? I asked the hall. Older than legal, the man's voice said, and the piano agreed with a chord that contained more history than tone. I spent the afternoon walking the rooms as if rehearsing a role. In the kitchen, the taps turned and gave water that tasted of copper and winter and infrastructure that had not been connected for decades. The pantry held jars labeled carefully in a neat hand. Barley, salt, patience. The labels were not jokes. The bathroom mirror refused to show me while I learned to be looked at. In the small back parlor, a radio sat under a cloth. The cloth declined to be removed. The stairs to the attic admitted me to the 5th tread and declined the 6th. I thanked them. Dusk assembled itself with a maturity that made noon look juvenile. The outside world practiced its traffic noise far away and decided to leave us in peace. Inside, the houses are adopted that evening gravity all old places carry like a vocabulary. I took a chair in the study and waited to see what needed saying. What happens to the bed? I asked, because questions left untended become drafts. He will wake when the house no longer needs to be awake in his stead, the woman's voice said. Or when you stop listening. I don't plan to stop, I said. You don't plan to tire either, the man added, amused without cruelty. But the house will show you how to pace patience. I opened the ledger to the first page and read the earliest entries from a century ago. Weather, deliveries, repairs. A note about replacing a hinge before it begins to express itself too eloquently. A list of guests expected and a list of guests who disappointed their invitations. A single line about the night a storm found a hole in the roof and wrote its name through 3 rooms. The entries were not profound, but they were exact. And exactness is a reverence that earns its keep. I know what you are now, I said aloud, but softly, so the sentence could try on its meaning before anyone heard it. You are not haunted. You are inhabited by the future you refuse to abandon. Close, the house said, in creak and tick, which is the accent of structures admitting compliments. We are a promise that learned to live indoors. I slept that night on a settee in the parlor, not in any bed the house had assigned to memory. The clocks ticked because that is what clocks do when they know they have an audience. The piano held its tongue. The door to the master room stayed almost shut and genuinely glad about it. A tea for 12 the house inhaled. Not a draft. Not a superstition. Architecture laid its weight gently on its own bones and decided to continue. I opened my eyes and did not move. The red pulse wherever it lives counted once and retired. Down the hall the mirror did not cloud. The sheet in the bed upstairs rose at the exact rate of dignity requires. In the morning I brewed coffee that tasted like rooms that respect you. The inspector did not return. A stray cat appeared at the gate, considered a career in archives, and chose the fence post instead. The city's breath moved around our lot the way water flows around a stone that remembers its job. I found the card again in the drawer, the line for custodian still blank. I placed it on the desk, slid a red pencil across its top margin, and left the room. Behind me the ledger stamped a sentence without the need of any stamp. File 004 active. Do not close. On the porch the air felt newer than it had any right to be for a house this old. I stood there with my hand on wood that had learned to hold memory without splinters and listened to the neighborhood pretend to be ordinary. The house waited with me, the way good companions do. Not to pounce on a moment, but to keep it from somewhere deep inside. That 4-beat rhythm tapped once, not insistence. Not alarm, merely attendance. I'm here, I said. And the house said, we know, and nothing else needed to be recorded. Beyond the simple truth that presence had been accepted, if you are listening to this, if they are around your own walls hum some evening in a cadence you cannot trace to a motor or a neighbor, consider that you may not be hearing the past at all. Consider that a place is offering you a job, not to haunt it with fear, not to rescue it with spectacle, but to keep it with manners. The house is waiting for its owner. The owner is whoever keeps the promise with enough patience to be forgiven for being new. Morning found me in the parlor, though I could not remember choosing sleep. The fire had not been lit, yet there held the aftertaste of warmth, the scent of something that had burnt cleanly and on purpose. I stood, slow, the way people do when gravity reintroduces itself politely. Every joint of the house adjusted in sequence, polite applause for waking. The red pencil I had left on the card now lay diagonal, across that did not accuse. The line for custodian was still empty, but a faint impression beneath it suggested a name had once been written and then retracted. That felt fair. I was not here to sign things. I was here to remember how to remain. Outside, the street was too ordinary. Sunlight on cracked pavement, a paper drifting against the fence, the smell of someone's breakfast 2 doors away. The world performs normalcy with great skill when you're standing in its audience. I leaned against the doorway, not crossing the threshold, and watched a postal truck drive by without slowing. It was the first time I'd seen a vehicle on this road. It didn't deliver. Some deliveries are older than the mail. Inside, the house shifted its balance like a person stretching after sitting too long. A chair creaked in the study, a hinge sighed upstairs. The piano murmured one chord under its breath. "Good morning," I said, because one must keep manners. The reply came not in words but in a soft alignment. All the clocks ticked at once, a single shared beat, then rested. That was the house's way of nodding. I took the notebook and walked to the kitchen. The sink held a single glass, rinsed and upside down, though I had left nothing there. The note on the counter, written in my handwriting, but with steadier lines than I remembered, read simply, "Inventory complete." Inventory of what? It did not specify. I poured water, sipped, and heard the faint echo of the same sip a second later upstairs. The house was repeating the gesture, like a mirror rehearsing humanity. I smiled. "You're learning," I said. The pipes answered with a courteous knock. By noon, light filled the hallways the way memory fills a dream, bright, but never intrusive. I decided to revisit the master room. The key was gone from my pocket. The door was open already. Inside, the bed was neatly made. The sheets smooth, the air motionless. No figure beneath, no pulse of red light, no sentence waiting to appear. Only stillness, so absolute it hummed. On the wall above the bed, the phrase "Welcome home" had faded almost entirely, leaving behind a suggestion of the letters, like ghosts of ink, but someone had added a new line. Written in pencil this time, faint and deliberate, "He is awake." Be kind to the echoes. I ran a hand across the fabric. It was warm, as if the bed had been recently occupied. I knew better than to pull back the covers. Some knowledge requires restraint. I wrote the line in my own notes, adding, "Temperature suggests presence, not haunting." The window curtain moved slightly, though no wind entered. Outside, the sky had clouded a light grey, so uniform it felt more like texture than weather. The house dimmed itself to match it, polite mimicry. Then, from the hallway, came a sound I hadn't heard before. Not the tapping rhythm, not the piano, not the whispers. It was a voice humming, softly, tunelessly, like someone remembering a melody from before music existed. I followed it to the stairway. The humming stopped. On the landing, where the portraits hung, one frame had fallen. The glass was unbroken, the nails unbent. The photograph inside showed the same faceless silhouettes as before, but something new glimmered where eyes should be 2 points of reflected light, caught mid-blink. I put the frame back carefully. Behind it, the wall bore faint writing, so thin it was almost hidden in the wood grain. "Keep the door open." Downstairs, the front door stood ajar. Beyond it, the street was empty again. The fog had returned, not thick, not theatrical, just enough to blur the world into suggestion. The sound of the city felt far away, like a station detuned by half a frequency. I stepped outside. The fog parted politely, revealing the gate still locked. I hadn't locked it. I reached for it, but before my hand touched metal, the latch lifted itself and settled back. It wasn't invitation. It was acknowledgement. Somewhere inside, the piano played 4 notes slow, deliberate, the same rhythm that had followed me since the first day. 4 beats, pause. 4 beats again. The sound carried across the yard and into the fog, echoing longer than acoustics allowed. Then faintly, from beyond the street, another piano answered. 4 beats. Pause. 4 beats. The world was replying. I returned inside, closing the door gently. The house seemed relieved. A chair moved on its own, shifting back to the table. From somewhere upstairs, a door clicked once. As if sealing an agreement, "You've been talking to the neighborhood," I said quietly. The clocks ticked once, perfectly in sync, and fell silent again. I sat at the desk and opened the ledger. The handwriting now alternated mine, the older script, and something between them. Today's entry had already begun. Day 4, the city is listening again. Prepare for company. The line below that, in smaller letters, not all guests will knock. I picked up the pen, wrote, understood, the ink shimmered as it dried, then vanished. That night, I stayed awake. The air felt different, charged, expectant. From beyond the windows came faint sounds, footsteps that never reached the door, voices that never shaped into words. The house held them all, polite but firm. Like a host managing too many visitors at once, when I finally slept, I dreamed of corridors with no corners, rooms folding into one another endlessly, each lit by a single low lamp. In every room, the same bed, the same sheet, the same faint outline beneath it breathing in rhythm with the house. I knew I was walking through its memory, a tour guided by walls. At the end of the dream, I opened a door and found myself standing outside at the gate again. The brass plate had changed. It now read, property of the living archive. When I woke, the fog outside had lifted, but the plate on the gate was exactly as I'd seen it in the dream. By evening, the tapping had returned. Only this time, it wasn't from the walls. It was from under the floorboards, closer, sharper, like a heartbeat learning to walk. I knelt, placed my hand on the wood. It pulsed once beneath my palm. Are you awake? I whispered. The reply was the faint sound of a latch turning upstairs, the master room. I went slowly, the way you do when you already know what you'll find. The door was open again. The bed unmade this time. The writing on the wall renewed, darker now. Deliberate. He is walking. A faint indentation on the carpet led toward the hall. The pattern of bare feet outlined in dust. I followed them to the study, then to the piano. The bench was pulled out as if someone had just risen from it. The final note still vibrated faintly in the strings. On the keys lay the bronze key, the one labeled Master Room. Its tag was gone. The ledger was open to a fresh page. No heading this time, just a single line, you're doing well. Don't stop now. The fifth morning began with the sound of paper turning itself. The ledger lay open on the desk again, a page half filled in handwriting that was no longer strictly human. The letters were too even, too calm, like they had been written by something that didn't need to breathe between words. He is walking, the top line said again. Beneath it, smaller, and the house walks with him. For a long moment, I just listened. The walls made no sound, but the air inside them moved with purpose. Not restless, not random, just aware. The silence had learned rhythm. When I stepped into the hallway, I could tell the house had changed again. The light came from nowhere in particular, not through windows or cracks, but from the air itself, a pale interior daylight that felt borrowed from memory. The portraits on the stairs had shifted places. Where my photograph had once been, now there was only a dark frame with no image. I touched the edge of it. The glass was warm. You're adjusting the archives, I said quietly. Why? The air answered in a way that didn't require sound, a small pressure at the back of the skull. The feeling you get when someone stands just behind you. Thinking the same thought, the piano downstairs gave 4 notes in acknowledgement. I made coffee in the kitchen. The house joined me, the pipes exhaled, the chair adjusted its posture, and the mirror above the sink cleared its breath. Every movement, every sound, every pulse seemed choreographed. As if the building itself was rehearsing the day's routine. On the counter lay a folded sheet of paper that hadn't been there the night before. The handwriting was delicate but firm, written in ink that shimmered faintly red when it caught the light. My dearest guest, I am pleased to inform you that the waiting period is almost complete. The house has remembered most of itself. Only one thing remains. Please refrain from opening any doors that open for you. Sincerely, EH. The initials matched the name on the photograph. Eleanor Hawthorne. I placed the letter on the table. The edge of the paper curled slightly inward, as if exhaling. When I looked away, it had flattened again. The coffee was still warm. I took a sip and nearly dropped the cup. The reflection in the dark liquid showed the study behind me. The desk, the ledger, the chair, but there was also something else. A figure seated in the chair, head bowed, writing slowly. The hand that moved across the page was mine. I turned. The chair was empty. The page, however, now bore new words. You are writing this? You always were. The ink shimmered once, then vanished into the paper like it had been absorbed. That was when the tapping began again. Not the 4-beat rhythm this time. Slower, uneven, like hesitant footsteps pacing across the ceiling. Then, a pause. Then again closer. I went to the hall and looked up. The ceiling boards were shifting gently, not from weight, but from thought. Dust fell like breath, I whispered. Arthur? The answer came not from above, but behind me, from the front door. A man's voice, faint, exact, carrying the weight of someone who had practiced silence for too long. Yes, I turned. The door was closed, but the handle moved once, then stopped. The wood expanded with a low creak, like a chest inhaling. Do you remember me? I asked. I remember what remembers you, the voice said. The words didn't echo. They absorbed into the walls. I don't know what made me open the door. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. But when I did, there was no one there. The fog had returned, heavier now, with light that seemed to come from nowhere at all. The world outside the gate had dissolved into silhouettes. The road, the fence, the shapes of distant trees, all drawn in grey charcoal and fading with every second, and in the middle of the fog stood a figure. He was motionless. His outline faint, his coat long, the same shape I'd seen in my dreams at the piano. He was watching the house, not me, but the structure itself, like a man remembering a friend he had once built. I stepped forward. The air between us hummed. Arthur Hawthorne, I said. The figure tilted its head, and the fog around it moved as though listening. Then, in a voice quiet but clear, he said, I left the door open. Then he was gone. The fog collapsed inward, vanishing so quickly the grass didn't even have time to bend. When I turned back, the door had already closed. Inside, every clock had stopped. The silence that followed was perfect. The kind of silence you hear when sound itself holds its breath. I walked through the hall, feeling the air dense with anticipation. The piano lid had closed, the keys hidden. The study door was half open. Light leaked through it, not daylight, but something colder, steadier. On the desk sat the ledger again, waiting, but this time it wasn't blank. The pages were full, dozens of entries, all written in alternating handwriting, mine and Arthur's. The dates were impossible: 1925, 1951, 1978, 2025, and then others with no year at all. Just phrases like after the return or before the silence. Every entry ended with the same line: he will come home. I flipped to the last page. The ink was still wet. He is home. Continue the record, and beneath it, my own handwriting. Understood. I didn't remember writing it. It was evening again, though I had lost track of when that happened. The house dimmed itself the way living things close their eyes. I stood in the center of the hall and listened. From somewhere deep inside, maybe the walls, maybe the space between seconds, came a faint ticking, irregular at first, then steady. Not clocks. A heartbeat. Then the voice again, both male and female, speaking together like two frequencies meeting in the middle. You've done well, they said. What now? I asked. The reply came soft, immediate. Now the house remembers without us. I felt it then, a low vibration spreading through the floor, into my bones, into the notebook in my hand. It wasn't frightening. It was inevitable. The air shimmered once, and the words I'd written began to fade. The ink lifted off the page like dust in reverse. The ledger closed itself. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I went to the window. Outside, the fog was gone. The world looked ordinary once more. Cars moved along the distant street. A dog barked. A delivery truck idled near the corner. Reality had resumed its schedule, and yet, in the reflection of the glass, I saw the faint outline of the man standing behind me, looking over my shoulder, nodding once, approvingly. I didn't turn. Some acknowledgements are meant to remain reflections. Then his voice, barely above a whisper, you see, it never needed owners. Only witnesses. The room brightened, and the reflection faded. On the desk, the ledger's cover had changed. The label now read, File 004 completed, but beneath it, a smaller line appeared as the ink dried. Active custodian, present listener. That was enough. I left the house that night, but I left the door open behind me. The fog didn't return. The world continued, yet sometimes when I walk past that street, I still hear it. 4 notes, faint and steady, played from somewhere that doesn't require walls, and when the sound fades, I hear another voice. The same one that first said my name inside that quiet house. You kept the promise. The house didn't disappear. It never does. It simply changed temperature, the way a room shifts between seasons when no one's watching. I came back a week later, out of habit, out of politeness. The gate was open this time, not broken, not forced, just ajar, as though I'd been expected. Grass had grown again evenly, like someone had tended it carefully. The path was swept. The front door stood closed, but when I pressed my hand against it, I could feel the faint hum beneath the wood. Alive, patient, content, Inside, everything was where it should be. The piano waited in silence. The clocks had returned to ticking, not in unison this time, but with human imperfection, a kind of mercy in their rhythm. The ledger lay on the desk, cover clean, corners sharp. I hesitated before opening it. When I did, the first page wasn't paper anymore. It was glass. Beneath the surface, words floated faintly, shifting like reflections on water. They formed one sentence at a time, not written but remembered. You did well. The waiting is complete. The house knows itself again. Leave the door unlocked. The glass darkened, and for a moment I saw my own face reflected there. Tired, older than I felt, but calm. And behind me, just over my shoulder, the faint silhouette of another man doing the same. He smiled the way one smile remembers another. Then the words faded, replaced by one last line, file transferred to active memory. I closed the ledger gently. The paper felt warmer than before, as if it had absorbed a pulse. Somewhere upstairs. A door opened and shut, not impatiently, just to stretch its hinges. The piano gave a single note. D. It held for seconds, then stopped. That was the house saying goodbye. I sat at the desk for a while. The sunlight from the window fell across the floorboards in stripes, the dust spinning like slow applause. For the first time since I'd entered this place, it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like exhaling. When I finally stood, I noticed something new on the wall above the desk. A framed document, simple, old paper, typed cleanly. It read, Certificate of continuance issued by the Living Archive status, ongoing custodian, confirmed date, unnecessary at the bottom, a faint red stamp, classified. But underneath, another, fresher one in black ink, file open. I left the house at dusk. The fog didn't follow me this time. The air was clear and the street looked as it should, ordinary, forgettable. Still, when I glanced back, I could see a soft light through the window, warm, constant, alive. The brass plate on the gate had changed again. It no longer said entry restricted by Municipal Order 31A. It said, Hawthorne residence occupied. A gust of wind passed through the yard, stirring the leaves. The sound it made was faintly rhythmic. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats again. I smiled. You kept it, I said aloud. The house didn't answer. It didn't need to. The quiet was answer enough. Weeks later, the department closed the case. Their official note was brief, property stable, structure preserved under historical protection. Last verified by field archivist, signature unclear, closing parenthesis. No one asked me to return. No one else was assigned to continue the record. The file number 004 remained in the system, marked with a single tag, active, but every now and then, on quiet nights, when I'm cataloging something else entirely, some other forgotten story, another sealed room, another archive that hums between truth and invention, I hear it again. Not through walls this time, not through speakers. Inside my own pulse, 4 beats. Pause, 4 beats. The rhythm never stopped. It just learned to travel differently. Sometimes when I listen closely, I hear a voice layered beneath it. Not warning, not command, just acknowledgement. You stayed long enough. That night, I wrote one final entry, not for the department, not for record, just for the house, wherever it listens now. To whoever finds this voice later, remember, the house was never haunted. It was faithful. It waited exactly as long as it promised to. Do not close the file. I sealed the page, marked it personal log, and placed it inside an envelope. When I looked up, it was gone. Taken, filed, accepted. That's how the archive thanks you, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. Now, whenever I pass through that district, I make sure to glance toward the end of the old street. I never see the house directly, but sometimes, if the evening is right, I notice a small light glowing behind the fog. Steady, patient red. The world keeps building new houses, new stories, new silences. But some places never close their doors completely. They wait, not for their owners, for listeners, and if you've heard this, really heard it, then the house has found another one. Welcome to the record. File number 4 closed and active.